The Supreme Court is going to take on some major immigration cases. They've agreed to review them. And with me to talk about that is Jennifer Hickey, one of FAIR's policy analysts, content writers, longtime political reporter, prognosticator, and seasoned political pundit. I'm Dan Stein, president of the Federation for American Immigration Reform. And don't forget, you want to click that subscribe button to get all of our YouTube content. If you're watching this on YouTube, you don't want to miss any of these episodes because we bring you some of the best and most important information about immigration policy, including these three cases that the Supreme Court has decided to review. And they're all pretty significant. All of them represent appeals of cases involving Trump administration positions. And because the election is so close, we're going to talk a little bit about the significance of this in terms of the direction of the country, the direction of the court, whether these cases will actually ultimately be reviewed on the merits, given the fact that if the president were to lose re-election, the Biden administration may change positions. And we're going to talk all about that right now. So welcome, Jennifer.
Good afternoon.
All right, so let's get this basically the first case here. The one that I'm most interested in, I know a lot of our viewers are as well, is the wall funding. Mm-hmm. President Trump's had an enormously difficult time getting any money through Congress. So in an innovative last-ditch effort, he's reprogrammed money, and they're now up to about 400 miles of border wall, just about there. And along comes the Ninth Circuit and a case involving the Sierra Club that is enjoying the use of these reprogrammed military funds, even though the president has said it was a national emergency. Mm-hmm. So what's ultimately going on and what's at stake here, would you say?
Well, I think the first sort of hat tip is that the Supreme Court agreed to a stay. So they basically, which essentially said that we're going to allow the funding, to go through, or the construction of it to go through, which was sort of an indication that they may be on the Trump administration side on this. Mm-hmm. At issue, again, is presidential authority. Should they rule in his favor, I think that will be exceedingly important for a second Trump administration term. The case is going to be decided or argued in February. Of course, that'll be after the election. So we don't know, what they will do or where it'll proceed from there. But I think it will give us some sense of what challenges or lack of challenges the administration would seek in a second term.
Well, sure, naturally, because so much could possibly change in a few weeks, not only in the alignment in the White House, but in Congress. It's possible the case could be moot, but it's also possible that a different Congress could appropriate funding for the president. Mm-hmm. Now, this case involves something that the second case you're going to talk about does too, which is this idea that the president, when enforcing laws at the border, has historically been enjoying a high level of discretion in how the president, as commander-in-chief, handles the border security, border crossings, and the treatment of aliens outside the country. Historically, courts have been loath to interfere with that discretion because in the end, sovereignty entails responsibility, which entails borders and border control. So immigration, border control, foreign affairs, military affairs overseas, normally these are areas the courts are very reluctant to get involved in. And of course, that has changed. We've seen an awful lot during the Trump administration of district courts getting involved and issuing these nationwide injunctions in areas which historically courts would have been very reluctant to get involved with, saying that these are really political questions that are an attribute of nationhood. So in the second case, something the Trump administration did that was extremely important was an effort to try to gain control of the asylum process, because caravans and smugglers and others were basically manipulating the asylum process by having people bring up phony claims. And under the interpretation of law that prevailed under the Obama administration, they were given work documents and then, depending on their age and what have you, let go in the country or resettled through resettlement agencies, only to disappear and have taxpayers have to go find them years later when they finally had a court hearing. The Trump administration came up with a policy called Remain in Mexico, part of a series of policies they put in place to deter this kind of chaotic and illegal border crossing and the gross mass manipulation of fraudulent asylum claims. The Remain in Mexico policy has helped to stem the tide of people trying to get across that border illegally, requiring them to wait in Mexico until a hearing date comes up. Obviously, there are opponents who don't like it, including organizations that represent them. Now, historically, those organizations, when they bring a lawsuit to challenge something like this, do not have legal standing, as they call it, to bring a case on behalf of the aliens, because ultimately the aliens have never been in the country. They don't really have standing to sue. They have no attachment to the country. It's an extension of the concept of consular non-reviewability. So unfortunately, the Ninth Circuit apparently decided, or whichever circuit it's in, that it's okay to review this. And there's an organizational plaintiff that's involved here, not the aliens themselves outside the country. There may be one or two anonymous plaintiffs. But anyway, the court, essentially the lower court, enjoined the Remain in Mexico policy. So I guess my question to you, Jennifer, is why do you think the Supreme Court took this case? Any idea?
I think one of the issues is because at the root, the challenge is about how the administration went about doing this. So much like the DACA case, they attached the Administrative Procedure Act, which is basically saying we're not arguing with the key, constitutionality of the program. We're merely saying the way you went about it was wrong. So it's to put it in a sports analogy, if you hit a home run, but they say that you crossed over the base path first, then they rule it that it was improper. So that's really the only way that a lot of these groups are able to tackle the policies that the administration has put forth, is because they can't argue with the success of the programs, which has been extraordinary in terms of gaining some control over the southern border. But conversely, that the president does have the authority to do it. They're just saying that they went about it in the improper manner. And that is what the court is going to review. So it may be an issue where the administration, if they gain re-election, comes back and does it through better procedures.
Yeah, this administrative procedure attack, the APA, recurs periodically in these assaults on the Trump administration's immigration reform. And this is an example here where they find some technical reason to claim they didn't comply with the notice and comment requirements. Again, when the Trump administration or any administration acts on emergency bases, as they have here, this was, after all, a national emergency. The APA is supposed to provide for that, to allow the shortcutting of emergency regulations. But courts that have a political agenda will get hung up on this whole question and take them back. And that's exactly what happened with the Trump administration's effort to repeal the so-called DACA program, a program that was issued by memorandum, issued in a manner that did not comply with the APA, and really had no statutory basis in law. And yet, at the same time, courts said to the administration, and frankly, Justice Roberts concurred in their when they remanded it, that they hadn't complied with the APA in repealing an illegal memorandum. And so the APA, unfortunately, can be manipulated and used in a very partial and political way, in our view, my view. And this is yet another example of that. The question of whether this would be mooted or not is interesting, because Joe Biden, when he was vice president, he flew down to Central America to try to develop a processing system so that people didn't have to come to the U.S. to make asylum claims. They could do it back in the home country, in the Northern Triangle countries. That was their approach, to fly him in at night secretly without talking to people. What can we expect? Do you have any idea what Biden would do if he's elected in this area with respect to the Remain in Mexico program?
I think it would be gone on day one, much like many of the policies that the Trump administration has put forward. I think it goes to what is interesting is that everybody on the open border side of the issue is arguing that this is we're recognizing human rights. These people have a right to come here, et cetera, et cetera. They're not addressing the dangers which these individuals put themselves in and their families in to get here because of a policy that gives them a slim hope that they will gain asylum here. If you are coming because, tragically, as we are seeing, economies in Latin America are being devastated and further devastated by the coronavirus, so the problem is going to get worse. So if the Biden administration does, as all indications are that they would, which is reverse this policy, open the doors, open the gates to asylum seekers, you are going to have more and more people putting their lives at risk to leave a country to hope to gain residency or citizenship here in the United States. So they are in fact endangering more people, while the Trump administration policy is actually saving lives. And that is the real tragedy.
All right, so we could expect another mad dash at the border. We could expect
Yes.
a huge outflow of people that the Trump administration has brought under control. And it's hard to imagine that the Biden administration has thought that through, or that they're prepared politically for the devastating impact those visuals would create, people massing along the border once again, and then giving them all work documents and flooding them in the labor market, combined with the other components of his platform, would create tremendous increase in the number of people looking for jobs in this country when we're trying to struggle with an economic recovery as it is as a result of the pandemic. That takes us to this final issue, which is the Census Bureau, and the fact that the administration has said we're going to try to back out from the count those people here illegally for purposes of congressional reapportionment only. That is, for purposes of redrawing seats in the House of Representatives, because there has fought this battle for now over 4 decades that states in the interior, states should not be losing representation to states like California and New York and Florida and Illinois, because those states, or some of those states, encourage illegal immigration. We have had a difficult time getting into court, again, because of the legal standing issue. But now the administration has initiated its own regulations. They have conceded in the course of the litigation, as I understand it, Jennifer, certain methodological challenges because of the lack of good data.
Right.
Citizenship question itself was challenged. And as a result, what the administration is saying in some of the litigation is they will simply count those illegal aliens who are in detention, as opposed to those who are actually out and about and living in an abode. Mm-hmm. That's, of course, a dramatic curtailment and very, very limited position to assert. But I guess they feel, for purposes of the litigation, it's on the strongest ground. And it would certainly be a great breakthrough to finally establish some pronouncement from the Supreme Court on whether or not, under the current statute, the president has this authority to make that adjustment. Now, politically, of course, the opposition comes from the big states. So what do you think is at stake in this case, politically at least?
Well, I think it highlights the fact that particularly for states like New York and California, which are, because of some of their domestic economic policies, are losing residents, every single day. And that's only, grown in the past 6 months during the pandemic, is that they're more and more reliant upon illegal immigrants for their basically population count. So that means how much federal money they are getting. The problem is that many of the illegal immigrants who are coming there are low income, low educated. So you're not going to be able to grow a tax base. So you are going to require more and more state funding. Both of the states are, basically bankrupt anyway. They continue to bleed residents, which is going to be complicating for the rest of the states, because they have 2 of your larger states, California and New York, is overly reliant upon a non-producing tax base, is a recipe for disaster. And the federal government is going to end up having to come to bail them out, and that will certainly be a more favorable administration, if it's a Biden administration, to take their hand in fist and ask for a handout.
Well, now that's an interesting answer. Biden, of course, has intimated he would bail out the states. He would certainly give a lot more money. I don't know where the money would come from. Obviously, from future generations of Americans, I suppose, having to pay these debts back to the Chinese or what have you. But it's interesting that he also has a plan as part of his platform to allow 500,000 immigrants to come, theoretically, on the petition of these same states to help repopulate their country in order to get people, who are suckers enough to come in and pay off their massive public pensions and other unfunded liabilities for the indefinite future. But as I recall constitutionally, Jennifer, I don't believe that you can actually restrain a person from relocating back out of those states
No.
until they move in. So it is unclear how you're going to require people to fulfill a state-based residency requirement as a condition of coming here, or how that would work. But the idea that you're going to lose your tax base, your high-value taxpayers, and then try to replace them with low taxpayer unskilled immigrants, the only thing that's going to give you is potentially more people in the census and therefore more federal money, but it's certainly no way to build a strong economy in your state for the future.
No, and it's essentially putting a finger in a dike rather than patching up a hole in the wall, and that goes for not only the countries that individuals are fleeing from. If you are losing your best and your brightest, as they're so called, then how are those countries set to improve? Similarly, if we are not growing our own young people into future workers, how are we helping ourselves out? So this temporary sort of stopgap fill in the population measure is to the disadvantage of both the countries from which the migrants come and the United States. So it's sort of a fail-fail situation, but one which appears to be politically palatable to potentially the next president of the United States.
So these three cases are now in front of the Supreme Court. These three cases involving the census and counting illegal immigrants for purposes of reapportionment, the Remain in Mexico policy that it requires asylum seekers to remain in Mexico until their hearing comes up, which has been enormously important in deterring illegal border crossings and fraudulent asylum claims. And lastly, the funding of border money, reprogramming for military purposes, which frankly, the border is an extension of national defense. Why do we send people halfway around the world to patrol in foreign countries, but we can't use military funds to protect our own borders? Interesting question. But those three questions are really emblematic of everything that is at stake in the next few weeks in the choices between Biden and President Trump. Joe Biden, and President Trump. And so let's all step back for a minute and take a look at the fact that rarely in American history has there been such a stark departure in political positions as we see now. And in so many ways, the immigration issue has led to or been an early warning, a canary in the coal mine about future issues that we see on the radical left. For example, defund ICE or close down ICE or abolish ICE has turned into defund the police. Stop alien detention has now turned into no bond and bond reform and prison reform generally. Most of the major issues that the left is gathering around today in its effort to kind of dismantle our entire legal and political system seem to have their genesis in the immigration debate and in immigration control overall. And those radical anarchists who are out on the streets, who are threatening violence if they don't like the way the election goes, have as one of their core demands the elimination of our borders, border anarchy, open borders they call it. And that's not what they're talking about. They're talking about uncontrolled borders and the end of the nation state. So the immigration issues that we're talking about here are really part of a wider war. And we should all be aware of them and pay attention to them, because the next few years are going to be very exciting in the immigration policy debate. And I know that's why you want to subscribe and hit that button on this channel, because you don't want to miss another episode of this. And we'll be back with you at some point in the near future to talk about other major breaking issues. Jennifer Hickey, thank you for joining me. I'm Dan Stein, and we will talk to you soon.